Right, so despite not hearing from Ben Whittaker himself yet, we have now heard from Ben Whittaker's promoter, Ben Shalom, and he has revealed the extent of the injury suffered by Ben Whittaker during his fight with Liam Cameron. So let's listen back to a few of Ben Shalom's comments, and in doing so, we can make our own judgment on this situation.
It didn't seem quite right from the start. But as soon as he got in the ring, I knew that wasn't the Ben Whittaker that we've seen and we watch and we see in the gym and we see in the ring.
Now, I believe that in life, two things can be conflicting but can also still be true at the same time. And did Ben Whittaker look like himself last Saturday night in the ring? No, he didn't. He looked less confident, he looked less dominant, and he didn't look like he was having as much fun as he usually is in the ring. But it's at this point that we have to address the elephant in the room, and that is the fact that Liam Cameron was a huge step up in opposition as to what Ben Whittaker had been facing in the past. So I truly believe that if Ben Whittaker was in with the same level of opposition that he had been in the past last Saturday night, then he probably would have looked like himself. Because when Anthony Yarde had pretty much boxed no one and then took the sizable jump up to world level to box Sergey Kovalev, I don't think we were sat there going, God, Yarde didn't look himself there, did he? Because I feel like we all understood that he had just jumped multiple levels, and therefore he wasn't going to look like himself because he wasn't in there with the sort of opponents that we gauged himself on. You know, when a championship top goal scorer gets promoted to the Premier League and they only score a fraction of the goals that they had scored the season before in the championship, we don't sit there and go, well, he's been exposed, do we? Because we understand that in all sports there are levels. But the fact that Ben Whittaker didn't showboat, got hit a lot more than we've seen so far, wasn't even able to keep Cameron off with his shots, and therefore had to box in a way that we hadn't seen him boxing to this point, doesn't mean that he was 100% going to lose the fight. Because as I said last time out, momentum can shift and swing in fights, and just so much as no one can say that Ben Whittaker would have shifted that momentum and would have come on strong in that fight, you also can't say that he wouldn't have. And listen, I personally believe that the momentum was very clearly shifting in favour of both the underrated and more experienced pro in Liam Cameron. But I'm also not going to sit here and write off the possibility that Ben Whittaker could not have come back into that fight.
All this stuff around him faking an injury, I mean, I've seen all that. He's gone over the ropes. He's had a 13-stone guy land on him. He was out 9 months last year with a neck injury. He's hit his ankle on the stairs, I think, when we've gone to the hospital. His ankle's like a balloon. He's got a problem with his neck that he's had before because of the way he's landed.
Right, so before giving a fair and calculated response to this statement, I'm just going to say what you guys, the boxing public, are probably thinking right now, and that is that Ben hasn't really clarified the injury there, has he? Ankle like a balloon and a pre-existing neck injury. But what we want to know is, what was the injury to the ankle and what was the injury to the neck? And being that the public outcry and media frenzy was so loud straight away after this fight, despite I accept that Ben Shalom and Team Whittaker have absolutely no responsibility or obligation to do so, I honestly don't think that a picture of this balloon-sized ankle when Ben Whittaker was in the hospital would have gone amiss. I actually think it would have dispelled a lot of the rumours that are circulating around the injury. Because although when we saw the footage of Ben Whittaker in the airport, the ankle was taped up, I wouldn't describe it as a balloon-sized ankle personally. But to be fair, I did know about that neck injury that had ruled Ben Whittaker out for a sizable chunk of time in the past, and I do believe that that would be the thing that if I was Ben Whittaker or if I was Team Whittaker, I would be most concerned about in that moment. And do you know what? coming from someone who has suffered injuries in their boxing career in the past before, it's not so much always the actual impact of the injury itself. It can sometimes be the psychology of the injury. The fear of aggravating that injury can sometimes be just as detrimental as actually aggravating the injury itself, and therefore can massively affect your performance. See, the thing is with boxing, right? Everyone sees the highs, but no one really sees the lows, do they? No one really sees the hard graft that goes in behind closed doors. And what they definitely don't see is the times that you're struggling to get out of bed because you've busted your ribs up in sparring, or you've jarred your neck, or you've broke your hand, or all these different injuries that are very, very common for boxers to occur. And you've also got to think, like, when you do have these injuries, right, these people aren't living inside your head, and they're not carrying the anxiety that you're carrying of, is this injury potentially going to hinder my career? And is it going to keep me on the sidelines? And is it going to stop me from doing the only thing really that I'm put here on this earth to do, which is box? And if you're someone like myself who, earns good money through boxing, but does also have other means of income, does also have other passions, then maybe it's not that bad. But if you are someone who from a kid has put all their eggs in one basket, more than likely skipped out on a real education, definitely skipped out on real life work experience, and then you're looking to pursue that dream of boxing, and injury occurs, that fear of being injured and being unable to box is something that can be living in your head and can be a very daunting and stressful experience. And that for me is why, as I've grown older and matured in age, I actually believe that living to fight another day can sometimes not be the worst thing. I mean, let's just look at Daniel Dubois. When he had his eye socket broke against Joe Joyce and was blinded in one eye, he had the option, in my opinion, to live to fight another day. And that label of being a quitter is one that stuck with him for a good couple of years. But look at Daniel Dubois now, riding high off the back of 3 really big and impressive wins, and right now sitting pretty as the current IBF heavyweight world champion. So you've got to ask yourself the question, was that the right decision in that moment? Because when Daniel Dubois broke his eye socket against Joe Joyce, he was just 24 years old. And imagine he had have continued, and imagine it had have got worse, and he had have been left blind in one eye. Then what? Then what does Daniel Dubois go and do with the rest of his life? How does Daniel Dubois find peace? More importantly, how does Daniel Dubois pay the bills and provide for his family? But here's where I have to play devil's advocate, because a sprained ankle or a bad neck is definitely not as serious as a broken orbital bone now, is it? And for every one example I can give you like Daniel Dubois, I can also point you in the direction of David Haye when he boxed on for multiple rounds against Tony Bellew with a ruptured Achilles. Kell Brook, who continued against Golovkin, one of the most fearful punchers in boxing at that time, with a broken orbital bone, only being saved by his corner throwing the towel in rather than opting out himself. John Ryder, when he battled through a broken nose against Canelo and went the distance. Danny Williams, when he dislocated his shoulder in a Commonwealth title fight against Mark Potter, and not only continued with the fight, but miraculously found a way to knock out his opponent while boxing with just one arm, and the list goes on. And because of the bravery, resilience and determination that those fighters showed, it is only logical that boxing fans look back at those moments and compare the way Whittaker went out to the way that those fighters battled on.
People are acting like it was a foregone conclusion. Ben could have easily gathered himself and won that fight fairly comfortably. We don't know. But to suggest that he faked an injury and suggest there were shouts from the corner to do that, I have to say that is way a big stretch of the truth.
Now, I agree with a lot of what Ben Shalom is saying here. The momentum was shifting, but that doesn't mean that Ben Whittaker couldn't have come back into that fight and shifted the momentum back in his favour. But at the same time, it's just as likely, maybe if not more, that Liam Cameron would have been able to really put his foot on the gas, would have been able to draw on his pro experience, and would have been able to win that fight against Ben Whittaker. I suppose, without the remaining 5 rounds that we had scheduled playing out, we'll never know. Because if the first fight between Carl Froch and George Groves had stopped after 5 rounds, I don't believe that many people would have thought that Carl Froch would have found a way back into that fight. If Dillian Whyte against Alexander Povetkin had stopped after 4 rounds, I don't think anyone would have thought that Povetkin would have chinned Dillian Whyte in the 5th round. Fights change, and sometimes they can change in an instant, so I would not rule out the possibility that Ben Whittaker could have come on top in that fight. But my gut instinct tells me that the way more seasoned, durable, and harder punching pro in Liam Cameron would have probably continued where he left off should that fight have continued. So Ben Shalom's right here. It was by no means a foregone conclusion that Ben Whittaker couldn't have won that fight. But to say that the suggestion that Ben Whittaker faked an injury is such a stretch from the truth isn't something that I can necessarily agree with. For me, I believe that we need either one of 2 things to truly put this argument to bed, and that is a scan, an x-ray, an MRI, a medical assessment from a trustworthy source, or Ben Whittaker to come out and state that he is ready to take an immediate rematch of Liam Cameron. And the problem for Team Whittaker is that the injuries you've stated aren't really ones that can be met with much proof, such as x-rays or scans, because if it was a case of a sprained ankle or a strained neck, unfortunately for Ben, a guy that I really like, by the way, and have been rooting for constantly since he turned pro, the minor nature of those injuries stated will always be met with the examples of boxers that battled through much worse injuries, like I've previously stated. And therefore, for me, there really is only one way to right the wrongs here, and that is to seek redemption. Make the immediate rematch with Liam Cameron, get in there and attempt to right your wrongs. Much like Dillian Whyte did against Alexander Povetkin, much like Lennox Lewis did against Ratman, much like Kovalev did against Elidia Alves, much like Tony Bellew did against Nathan Cleverly, or like Adonis Stevenson did against Darnell Boone. Rematches can happen, and rematches can be swung in the opposite direction. Once again, we can play devil's advocate here, and we can look at the fact that David Haye never rematched Carl Thompson, and David Haye still went on to win world titles and achieve so much more in boxing and leave much of a better legacy than Carl Thompson, the man who beat him early on in his pro career. Vladimir Klitschko never avenged his loss to Corey Sanders, but still went on to win multiple world titles and leave an unbelievable legacy in boxing. And to bring it back, Daniel Dubois has neither rematched Joe Joyce or Alexander Usyk, but still stands right now as a legit world champion. So what I'm saying here is there really is no right or wrong answer for Ben Whittaker, but you would imagine that the outcome of this fight is seriously affecting him. And let's be honest, it can't be nice, can it, to have 99% of the media slamming you, questioning your heart, questioning your honesty, and most of that will be coming from guys who have never even laced up a pair of boxing gloves, let alone achieved anything in comparison to what you have achieved in the sport. But in my opinion, I just truly believe that Ben Whittaker does need to take this rematch. And do you know what? Even if he does take the rematch, and even if he doesn't win the rematch, what he will do is he will win the public's respect, and they will acknowledge the fact that he tried at least to right the wrongs. Apart from the odd person here and there online, I truly believe that the public really respected David Haye for getting back in with Tony Bellew after that loss, despite the fact he got himself chinned. And David Haye is a great example that Ben Whittaker could take note from. He suffered a really, really bad injury in that first Bellew fight. He was both dropped and stopped. But with the bad memories still haunting him of the Klitschko fight and the fact that the media absolutely ripped him to pieces after he blamed his little toe for the loss, he decided to ignore the fact that his body was breaking down, and he decided to go back in to the rematch and go out in a blaze of glory, albeit in defeat. And despite not achieving what he wanted to in that second stage of his career, what he did do is right the wrongs and prove to the public that he did have both heart, desire, mental resilience, and pure toughness. So let's wait and see what Ben Whittaker's next move is. I obviously really hope it's the Liam Cameron rematch, but what I do sincerely hope is that Ben Whittaker is doing okay. And I know there's so many people that will say that if you live by the sword, then you die by the sword, but at the same time, he is a young man, and it can't be nice opening your phone or newspapers or whatever it is and just reading constant negative media around yourself, can it? And you guys can point me back in the direction of the fact that Ben Whittaker was disrespectful to Liam Cameron. He mocked Liam Cameron's appearances, he mocked his clothes and things like that, and I just don't think there's any place for that in boxing personally. But to draw you back to what I said at the start of the video, two separate things can be conflicting but can both be true at the same time. Should he have gone on in the way that he did? Probably not. In fact, definitely not. You shouldn't mock a man's appearance or mock a man's bank balance or what they can afford to wear and whatnot. But at the same time, you can still feel sorry for someone when they're feeling down, whether or not you feel that they brought that upon themselves or not. But what I do know is whatever level Ben Whittaker ends up proving to be, I think he's good for the sport. I think he brings eyeballs onto the sport, and I think he brings entertainment at every given opportunity. And as for Ben Shalom himself, whose interview I've reacted to there, I've met Ben a couple of times. I think Ben's a great guy, and most importantly in boxing, I think Ben really, really values and cares about his fighters. So this is definitely not a video where I'm just looking to disagree with things that Ben Shalom says, but as you all know, it is a hot topic in the media at the moment, and to be completely transparent, the first video I done on it got really good views, so I needed to cover it again. But anyway, people, let me know your thoughts. Please subscribe if you're not already to the channel. I'm really trying to grow it and push the content out as constantly as I can. I will see you all in the next one.